Have you ever been disappointed by a sequel to a beloved movie? Of course you have. If you've ever seen a movie with a numerical value in the title, there's an 80% chance that it disappointed you, and it would have changed your outlook on sequels forever until you immediately went back to the theater to repeat the experience. Alita Battle Angel. There is a lot to unpack here. The manga, the quirky American translation work that changed the name and main characters' names for some reason, the OVA made by up-and-coming animation powerhouse Madhouse, James Cameron buying the film rights, the development hell the script went through for over a decade, the baffling choices made by producer and would-have-been director, if not for Fox, James Cameron, the meta-controversy battle between critics, fans, the Captain Marvel comparison, the late box office bloomer the movie ended up becoming and only barely making back the money it cost in the first place, and, of course, dozens of attention-seeking journalists attempting to demonize the film using baseless virtue-signaling accusations, an upsetting trend which, unfortunately, continued long after the movie finished its run in America. If you enjoyed this film, that's okay. Lots of people enjoyed this film, and some people didn't, and that's fine too. The movie ended with sequel bait, and if that made you hungry for more, great. And now the hashtag Alita Army crying to the winds that we need a sequel. Disney has been caving to public pressure lately, and there's a chance that the Alita Army's voice will be heard. There is a chance that someone working at Disney will decide to greenlight some Alita-related project. It will enter production, the news will be released, the journalists won't be demonizing it anymore because Disney. The Alita Army will rejoice, the trailer will drop in a year or so, and the anticipation, oh, the anticipation. It's gonna suck. And that is the truth. I am begging you to stop asking for a sequel. Not because it will never happen, but because I do not want to see an Alita Battle Angel movie made and paid for by Disney. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're just getting started. Spoilers. If you have not watched Alita Battle Angel, you should do so and return, as I will be spoiling that. Additionally, if you have not read the manga, you absolutely should do so, and I will be spoiling nearly every major story element in the source material and talking at length of the events following the books covered in the movie. This discussion will be extremely in-depth, so once you've done all that, come grab a snack and indulge me. If you've read the manga, the first thing that pops out is the outrageous violence, blood, gore, and overall lack of respect for human life. To those who discovered that Alita was being adapted in America as a future feature film directed by James Cameron, the question of the movie's rating hung in the air, and all the implications that come with it. For all its content, both visceral and intellectual, an R rating would appear to be the most fitting. However, ever since the advent of PG-13, studios have discovered that they can take that R rating, make a little tweaks here and there, and boom, that same movie has the potential to appeal to a wider audience and stuff their purses even fatter. At first, it was meant to just be PG with a little hot sauce, but studios quickly started to neuter R franchises in the hopes of appealing to a wider audience, and PG-13 was their flagship. The resulting creative decline in movie quality has become apparent, but some may not understand why. Let's dig deeper. Movies are expensive. Cheap movies have lots of creative freedom, and directors, writers, editors have plenty of creative room to play with. But with an R rating, that only increases the imagery and subject matter that movie makers can experiment with. Some of the cultural touchstones come from the 70s and 80s when budgets were smaller and directors had permission to let their freak flag fly. Big budget movies, on the other hand, have so much more to lose. To a studio who pays the bills, a giant movie is a giant gamble, and with modern production budgets swelling into the hundreds of millions, producers have been coming down harder on their crews to play it safe. Studio executives will rewrite the script mid-production to include some arbitrary mandate. Marketing and PR executives can get nervous about big important moments in the movie and demand to have it changed or taken out, or even reshoot entire scenes long after the director has gone home. Investors and producers want the movie to make money, and studio interference is the mechanism they use to steer an uncertain production in a hopefully more lucrative direction. And to be fair, some of the changes have saved movies. More often than not, however, it ends up hurting the story and audience reception. These men aren't storytellers, they're businessmen, and a PG-13 rating will always appeal to them as a safer, more shrewd alternative to a harsher, challenging, experimental, or potentially divisive movie. So Alita, PG-13 or R? Well, from interviews going back to the mid-2000s, Cameron made it clear that he was hoping he could tame it down to PG-13, and ultimately he did just that. Critics have mentioned that the movie still manages to push the rating, but I don't think it does. Seriously, compare this to Lord of the Rings or Raiders of the Lost Ark. CG violence with blue blood is not breaking new ground in wide audience land, and your Catholic grandmother won't even bat an eyelash at one single F-bomb. Trust me, she says worse when you're not looking. But what does this matter? Well, the budget, to start. Alita cost $170 million. It's no Star Wars or Marvel movie, but it's still a pretty hefty cost to a studio who's already unsure about all this anime stuff. Furthermore, when the first trailer dropped, viewers immediately pointed out the pretty atrocious CG of Alita's face and crazy big eyes. You can thank Cameron for that decision, by the way. Panicking at the backlash, Fox Studio wisely pushed back the rumor release date and increased the length of post-production for 3 months. This single event likely accounts for $20 million of this movie's overall budget. But ultimately, the hard work from Weta Digital and Cameron's willingness to listen to the negative trailer reception definitely saved us from a movie where her face looked like this. Seriously, why do people point at the Sonic movie like this is the first time this has happened? According to my own speculation, I'm going to claim that the original budget was $150 million, but increased to $170 million to fix Alita's face CG. Now, no news ever came out that James Cameron was ever planning to film an R, leaving it open to be edited down to PG-13 later, as that was kind of a trend for some time. But with the budget spiking up like that, I don't think there was any way Fox would allow the movie to remain R, had that been the case. But again, what does that matter? What does that change? Well, everything, actually. Let's start with... A story's setting is just as important as its characters. Often the setting is a paramount part of characters' abilities, limitations, background, and motivations. A murder mystery wouldn't be all that suspenseful if the characters could just get up and leave for their safety. That's why they're often set in closed spaces, like being in a locked room or trapped in a blizzard. Judge Dredd and RoboCop wouldn't have any place in their own stories were it not for the crime-riddled future cities they live in. Prison escape story, by its very nature, necessitates that the characters be in a prison or some kind of prison-like environment, and that their surroundings affect them directly and drives the motivation to escape. This brings us straight to Iron City, as it's called in the movie. And wow, this place is so colorful, diverse, pedestrians are eating, shopping, laughing, playing, it's so vibrant, rich, and frankly, everyone looks pretty content. Why would anyone want to leave this place? Iron City looks so great! Even when the characters just leave the city, they go into a lush, equatorial jungle setting, with sparkling water and clear skies. But Hugo wants to live in Zalem, for some reason. It's almost like there's a missing link between the characters' motivations and the story. At the end of the film, Hugo's tragic climb up to the Zalem is explained by his dialogue. But why? What does he want up there? Does he dislike Iron City? Why does his death feel so... empty? The answer is simple. Nearly every element of the setting, content, and tone of the film contradicts the character's motivation. It's almost as though the character has an arc when there's nothing driving it. Why am I fixating on Hugo? Because during the opening events of the manga, Hugo's role in the story is short but extremely critical to Alita and to the reader. Something's missing. To find it, let's take a look at the manga. Iron City is a lawless nightmare. No government, no cops, only bounty hunters. Poverty, starvation, raving lunatics, alley rapists, violent gangs, gambling, depravity, and unspeakable destruction of human life. The city is overrun with it. In fact, Iron City is a bit misleading. It makes it sound like a neat futuristic city, right? Well, in the manga it's called Scrapyard. Like the name says it all. This is barely a place for people to live, but they have to because outside the city is Mad Max. Yes, apocalypse punk biker gangs and warlords rule the ashy nuclear wastes, and no one is dumb enough or equipped enough to deal with it. This psychotic, nearly lawless city is literally the safest place to live that these people know of, and that ain't saying much. So why do characters want to leave Scrapyard? In the manga, that's a dumb question. No one wants to live there, but they'll probably die in the desert if they leave. But no, just put the city in South America next to a lush, peaceful jungle, where a bunch of teenagers can go on a leisurely hike without an adult. It's fine. Oh, and did I mention that there's a thriving market for human body parts and organs in Scrapyard, and this is one of the cornerstones of the economy here? It's funny that it was a missing from the movie. It's almost like switching to PG-13 forced the writers to remove one of the key components of the setting, which further leaves wider holes in both the plot and character motivations that we'll get into. The real Iron City and the people in it are ugly, violent, and very rare is any trace of honor or mercy. This is a city where the strong survive and the weak die, Alita's struggle as a character is that she's motivated by Eido's self-righteousness, empowered by the fighting style of the Panzerkunst, and a darker hint of real bloodlust to use it. But Scrapyard is a jungle with a food chain, and for all her strengths and backstory, Alita isn't even on top of it. With an R rating, we would have seen the real city, the real world of Alita, a dirty, neon-drenched dystopia, would have fit the story much better and informed both Alita and the audience of why these people are so callous, why you don't go wandering at night, why Hugo dreams of leaving. With an R rating, the audience would watch with shock as innocent people are ripped apart, blood and ruptured organ cavities spraying across the pavement as criminals with augmented cybernetic superstrength commit all the evils they please, and we're left to gaze in horror at the brutal realities of the violence on screen. But the movie is too squeamish to show that. It takes the Samurai Jack approach to violence, replacing sprays of gore with blue oil, and destroyed human flesh with shiny clean machinery. We are left to smile and nod at the destruction, but our eyes are shielded from the horrifying reality of that same destruction because we're all just helpless babies with soft tummies, and this movie should include toddlers because we need butts in the seats. We need to turn a profit, guys, so let's make sure that no one feels challenged or uncomfortable by the savage Mad Max-like Blade Runner-type dystopian nightmare based on one of the most graphic comics ever made. And let's not forget the great city of Zalem looming overhead. People assume that it's pretty nice up there because Scrapyard is Zalem's toilet, and these people live off of the refuse. And why are conditions so appalling? Because Zalem can't be bothered to keep the streets clean themselves, but they will come down with swift, fiery destruction on anyone that disobeys their laws. What are these laws? Well, no firearms of any kind, for one. This segues nicely into the next major deviation. Zalem plays a major role in the story, but people don't know much to anything about it. In the manga, the denizens of Scrapyard have absolutely no idea what's up there, how or why it's up there. All they know is that they run the factory, and factory law is final. The movie does an okay job at preserving the mystery, and the character Hugo says that one day he wants to go up there. He even dies at the end, trying to fulfill his long-dead dream. But why this dream? Why this last desperate need to climb up there before it ends his life? A young boy named Hugo lives with his big brother and sister-in-law. His older brother is smart, bold, and obsessed with Zalem. He questions its origins, how to get up there. Hugo is enraptured by his brother's passion, and one day his older brother gets an idea to build an airship that will take them there. The only problem? Flying is forbidden in Scrapyard. Not even birds are allowed into Zalem's airspace. Hugo's older brother says it will be secret. Hugo is overjoyed at the idea, but his sister-in-law is terrified. Then one day, she sends Hugo out to run an errand. Hugo notices that she's acting strange, but goes anyway. But when he returns, he finds his home on fire, the airship destroyed, and his older brother dead. She tipped off the hunter warriors to save herself and Hugo. Devastated, Hugo runs away to live on the street. Sometime later, he notices a stall selling salvaged body parts on the streets, and in one of the jars is his brother's hand. Unable to afford it, he begs them for a hand transplant, his brother's for his own. They do it, but even though they can remove the scars of the operation, Hugo refuses. He needs to remember his brother, to always remember the dream he fought and died for. This is where Hugo runs into Vector and is offered an opportunity to go to Zalem through his connections, provided an exorbitant fee. A fee he can pay by harvesting spines for the market. He's at the bottom of the food chain, but by giving yourself to the corrupt system just a little, it gives you a carrot to chase after. Hopes of fulfilling your dreams, just as long as you play by their rules. And it's a lie. After Zapan's pride is wounded, he goes after Hugo in petty revenge. He catches Hugo and the spine thief gang and snitches to the factory, who puts a bounty on him. Running away, Hugo is caught by the same hunter warrior who killed his brother. Alita kills the hunter warrior and takes Hugo's head back to Ito, who quickly attaches his head to a cheap robot body. But afterwards, Ito reveals the truth. He was once a Zalemite, and that there is no way anyone would be allowed to go back up there. And while he explains this, Hugo wakes up, full of anger and denial. He and Alita confront Vector, who admits the truth, that no one goes to Zalem except in pieces. Hugo's dream is dead. Hugo's soul is dead. Alita pleads with Hugo. They can start over. There will still be a tomorrow. Hugo climbs the tube, his years of hard-earned money falling carelessly to the crowds below. When Alita catches up with him, a ring with spinning blades comes down. A factory deckman explains that these are dropped by Zalem every 500 meters to kill any rats that dare climb up. Then it remarks, "Ooh, made it past the 6th ring, that's a record. Wonder how far up he'll get." Cut to Hugo, his robotic feet missing, crawling up slowly, desperately fighting the wind. He finally breaks through the cloud barrier at the cusp of coming face to face with his obsession. Alita meets him there, begging him to go back. Hugo doesn't care, he's lost his mind, his will to live. But Alita challenges him, that there's more out there than just Zalem and this filthy city below, that together they can find a new path and start over. Finally, Hugo accepts, though the answer is begrudging, defeated and resigned. "I won," Alita thinks. "I pulled Hugo's heart away from the temptations of Zalem. He belongs to me, you cruel illusion. You can't have him." Then, in an instant, that is what happens to Hugo in the comic. He's not very likable, but we understand him. He's a victim, a believer, a loser struggling for a dream he will never be strong enough to achieve. In a way, he's the voice of the reader, a surrogate for us and what we could be like in this world. In a normal happy ending, all the mysteries are revealed. The underdog gets his due, he struggles and stumbles, but eventually love conquers all and the mighty evils that stand in its way are brought down at the hands of our small but noble heroes, and justice prevails no matter how hopeless it seems. The world of Alita is a food chain, and noble intentions will get you nothing. It is a world where the strong eat the weak, and you, yes you, the reader, are weak. You can bitch and moan that it's all so unfair and no one cares. Zalem's defense systems don't care about your dreams, and they were made by much smarter, colder people than you will ever be. The hunter warriors who act as the city's only semblance of peacekeepers don't care. They're in it for the money. And the escalated dangers of the city call for aggressive augmentation, which allows for even greater and more inhuman levels of destruction, which inspires the criminals to adopt the same horrifying power that crushes human strength. Life is cruel, short, and meaningless. Our struggles are meaningless. That vast, infinite universe goes on as we toil and sweat and bleed and complain until one day, we and everyone and everything we know and love and hate is gone forever, and no one will remember. One day, even the systems, languages, and symbols that define our lives will disappear, and future generations will lack the context to even begin to understand us, provided that there is even some monetary or academic motivation for them to care, much less put forth the effort. Life is meaningless suffering, and nothing matters. This depressing concept becomes the driving theme of the entire overarching story, and the backbone of Alita's journey. She experiences growth, love, loss, suffering, and self-discovery, a struggle to rise above her own weaknesses and sin and become superhuman, to change the world to her own will and impose meaning on this meaningless world. In the movie, Hugo just wants to leave because, I don't know. Iron City seems pretty cool, but he wants to go up there, I guess. Then he's framed for murder he, of course, never committed. Then Zapan gets him anyway. In the end, when he's in the robot body, he just climbs up the pipe because evil bad man Nova snitched that he was alive and the bounty's back. And then evil bad man Nova smirks as he stands at the controls and he does a thing and sends down a single defense ring. Hugo dies, Alita yells, "No!" Roll credits. Look, this change is okay. It's fine. But it's a steak without the meat. It's just seasoning. And speaking of no good Nova, by the end of the story arc, Nova has been alluded to just once. When Makaku explains his tragic backstory as an orphan lost in the gutter, no one ever cared or noticed him. Then one day, as he stared longingly at the world above, some street punks blasted him with a flamethrower through the sewer grating just for fun. Permanently disfigured, his wounds festering to the point of death, the words of longing fading in his mind. Someone notice me. But a mysterious figure saves him and tells him that he will give him a new body. And he says, "Show me the desire that exists within your heart, and I shall craft the form that best embodies it." That is the voice of Nova. And the body he's given is a maggot form that allows him to rise to the surface, steal the bodies of mighty warriors, and to wreak unstoppable havoc to his heart's content. Quote, "Simply to leave the signs that I had ever lived." And it turns out that what he truly wanted was to die, a wish that Alita would finally grant. In the movie, we don't get any of that. Gruishka, or whatever his name is, works for Shiren, who works for Vector, who takes orders from Nova for some reason. Nova takes people over to talk to other people. He's described like a puppet master who's behind every bad thing in the movie. He built Gruishka's body, controls Vector. He's the reason why Ido, Shiren, and their daughter are exiled from Zalem. And at the end, he's the one that kills Hugo for some reason. Oh, and not to mention that Nova was the key target for the Martian military group that Alita was in during her flashbacks, also for some reason. Vector and Nova have never met. The organ harvesting market was a fact of life that Nova wasn't involved or interested in. And the defense rings were an automatic system in effect all day, every day. And Alita's backstory, we'll get to that. Nova is not really a villain, per se, in the manga, but more of a wild card who's put in the position of an antagonist at times. But movie needs a bad guy, and we don't have enough of those, so Nova is now the kingpin who's responsible for all the bad stuff that happens. Not Zalem, not chance or bad luck, not greed, but the evil in the story has been blamed on one person, who frankly would not do what Nova does in this film. Why would Nova want Alita? Why would Nova exile Ito and Shiren? Why would Nova want Grushka to do his bidding? And why does Grushka take orders? Why in the world did Nova kill Hugo? Who knows, who cares? Movie needs a baddie, nuances for booger brains. James Cameron's Avatar made a truckload of money. This single sentence has had enormous impact on Alita in many ways, but it could have made more if it wasn't banned in China. The Chinese box office is absolutely gigantic, and Hollywood would be stupid not to dip their toes into the market. But China has a few requirements that they impose on their entertainment. No gratuitous violence, no sexuality of any kind, and whatever you do, absolutely no underdog story about fighting the big bad government. Says this random article quoting some other report, likely quoting some other report. The Chinese government feared the revolt by the indigenous Na'vi population shown in the film would ignite the Chinese people's imagination to instigate a similar popular revolt. Haha, yeah, I wonder why. If you think the bad humans oppressed the Na'vi in Avatar, boy, let me tell you about Zalem. If you make, use, or even have a firearm in Scrapyard, you're dead. If you try to fly in the air, you're dead. And if you try to get to Zalem, somehow, you're dead. But in the movie, Zalem doesn't send out the defense rings periodically every single day to keep the rats off. It was Nova, of course. Zalem doesn't want human body parts so that they can sift through the genetic material to add some new, fresh variety to the DNA sequencing systems that keep their sexless, eugenics-driven society from collapsing. No! That would be a bad and therefore unthinkable thing for a government to do. Why, it was in fact this bad individual over there. It is not the system or governing authority in power doing the bad. It was this bad egg over there. And the shitty part is that it worked. The movie flopped hard in the US, but the Chinese market saved it. Cool. Awesome. Go fillet a pineapple. All it cost was the risk of speaking to a higher, darker truth about the exact kind of government that Zalem represents. All it cost was your soul. I'm upset about this to no end, and I wish to move on now. Anyway, Scrapyard was changed to Iron City, a much more friendly PG-13 version. They changed the relationship between Zalem and Iron City in an unfortunately successful bid to appeal to the Chinese government, which completely subverted a critical element to the setting and thus befuddled Hugo's motivation, all while pivoting the blame to Nova. And while Nova is a central antagonist to the big chunk of the story, he is not a traditional villain. Frankly, he's more of the story's trickster god, a wild card that upsets the balance of power and motivates the story. Making him some cold, grinning murderer obsessed with Alita from the beginning, for some reason, makes him stupid and boring, and I didn't really care about this character in the movie, and I don't really want to see more movies about him. Super ultra industrial strength spoilers. In the OVA, Shiren's still living body parts and brain are in a box. This serves many uses, to the point that it's in the movie. It demonstrates the only way to get to Zalem. It's a shocking moment. It's just a great sad image. But there's a problem with this image. In the manga, the parts going up to Zalem are just anyone's. But in the OVA and the movie, it's Shiren's, who's not in the manga. And Shiren is an adult from Zalem. Why is this a problem? Adults in Zalem don't have organic brains. When a child in Zalem turns 19, they undergo an initiation which extracts their organic human brains with a microchip. The brain is zipped off to be installed in a massive centralized computer system called Melchizedek, and the adult's behaviors are tweaked ever so slightly by Zalem systems to avoid aggression, dangerous ideas, etc., all while letting them keep the illusion of freedom and free will. But the truth of the initiation is Zalem's deepest, darkest secret, and anyone who finds out about it is hunted down and murdered by Zalem's security. When the OVA showed Shiren's human brain, the secret had not been revealed in the manga yet. Those chapters in the manga had not yet been written. But the movie has no excuse. The manga had been finished years ago, and they should have known better. But they went with the twist in the OVA, rather than the biggest, darkest secret in the source material, a secret which later drives the entire plot of the source material. During the events of the next book, Nova, who'd barely appeared in the story, is exiled by Zalem, and Alita is later hired by, held hostage by, saved by, later betrayed by a Zalemite government agent to track down Nova and bring him in. Alita spends the better part of the entire first series pursuing him, all because he knows this terrible secret, the revelation of which would bring about a cataclysmic consequence, which acts as the inciting incident for the next series, Last Order. The movie sequel baits so hard, yet it preemptively hamstrings the most absolutely critical plot element in its own source material. So if they made sequels, what would they even be about? They would literally need to retcon the twist at the end of Battle Angel or come up with something completely different. And at this point, they've changed so much of the source material that it basically has nothing in common with it, making the entire effort meaningless. Also, I'd like to hit the pause button for a second. Let's just let Christoph Waltz do his thing.
I've removed it myself. Mark of Zalem.
If there's anybody who worked on the film watching this, can you explain this to me? What happened here? Did Christoph Waltz he loved the part, but he didn't want to wear the Mark of Zalem on his forehead? Did the makeup department only make two, one for Jennifer Connelly and one for Christoph Waltz, but then they shoehorned in Edward Norton as Nova in some early shots, so they used Christoph's and they just didn't have any left over? Yeah, I know, it's a small matter and it doesn't really impact the story very much in this movie, but it's a detail that reoccurs throughout the story and has an impact later. Especially in regards to the secret of Zalem. Children who become adults through the initiation receive the mark during that procedure. So again, why did Shirin have one if she has a human brain, and why does Ido not? I'm so confused. Am I nitpicking? Because at first that's what I thought, but the more I think about it, the more what? Whatever, let's move on. Ido and Alita's relationship is very different. Because Ido is very different. In the manga, Ido was young, kind, petty, idealistic, immature, talented, and an absolute man-child. When he finds Alita, he doesn't want to protect her because she's like the daughter he lost tragically. He sees her like a beautiful doll he can dress up. When she breaks free from him to assert her independence, he throws a temper tantrum. They're friends. But for a while, there's a bit of a will they won't they between the two, like a potential lover. They spat and compete like siblings. She looks up to him like a daughter to a father, seeking his pride and approval. The relationship between these two characters is so much deeper and stranger than the simple straight-laced daughter and stern but responsible old father figure, as it's presented in the movie. It's not bad, but it does feel like a downgrade. Ido's crotchety old assistant, who acts like an older, wiser, reasonable mentor for Ido, was replaced by this plank of wood. This character dies in the next arc, but this movie does nothing to endear her to us. I don't even know her name. Did she even have a name? Did she serve any role in the movie? Makaku is changed from a tragic monster to a big dumb henchman, but we already went over that. Also, when Makaku enters Kanzo's bar, he doesn't kill a dog and leave, he kidnaps the bartender's baby and brings it down with him into the sewers. That baby is Koyomi, by the way, who in the movie is like a teenager for some reason, who doesn't really seem to have a place except for her connection to Hugo and his gang of heartthrobs. The motorball. Planting and payoff is a simple storytelling concept. A classic example is Chekhov's gun. If there's a gun mounted on the wall in the center of a set piece on a stage play, the rule is that at some point, probably in the third act, that gun will be pulled from the wall and used to shoot somebody. If no gunshot takes place in the third act, do not introduce the gun to the audience. If you introduce a gun to the audience, it must be used in the story. Pulling a gun out of nowhere is not clever, but will be seen as cheap. Establishing the gun from the beginning, but never using it, is a waste of your audience's time and attention. If you want a payoff, you must plant it first. The early introduction of Motorball was a great spectacle for the movie, but it came at a cost. Key moments in the story that established context needed for those big emotional payoffs just don't happen. The story of why Hugo is so desperate to get to Zalem, the disturbing revelation that Makaku is actually a child, permanently trapped in the body of a metallic brain-sucking parasite. These moments, which plant for the emotional payoff in the first two books on which the movie is based, don't happen in the movie. Instead, the motorball sequences that happen in the third book take up that screen time, and though we get to enjoy this fun spectacle, the emotional payoff of Hugo's death is robbed of its weight, its tragedy, without context. Having lost her memories, Alita fights to recapture her past and piece it back together. The mystery of her past life is tied to important events of the world, though she remains unaware for some time. The manga took its time, slowly revealing her past piece by piece, not only very sparsely across years of publication, but even across the many years of Alita's journey. After the brutal destruction of her home and family, a child of Mars was saved and inducted into the School of Panzerkunst, elite Martian combat specialists trained in the most advanced martial arts in history. She climbed the ranks and became a member of the Mauser School's secret unit, the Camera Group. This unit was ruthless, fanatical, and took dangerous jobs from higher powers, which resulted in unspeakable tragedy and destruction. Alita was a deadly, ruthless terrorist who was executed for horrific crimes that murdered almost 500,000 people. Imagine coming to terms with that. The intrigue of Alita's past was drawn out in a long, dangerous journey of self-discovery, leading her to the horrifying truth. This too she would face and overcome. The movie had other plans. By the end of the movie, we were outright told that she was a high-ranking soldier who fought for the Technarchy and was involved in a blunt, full-frontal assault on Zalem to kill Nova. Thanks, movie, I was really engaged in that mystery you were building up. This version of Alita waking up with amnesia in the first place is pointless, because while her character arc wraps up nicely at the end, remembering who she used to be doesn't impact her or the story at all. If anything, all it does is reinforce the motivation to kill Nova, even though the rest of the movie has already justified that by putting the blame of all evil ever committed on him. And when the past is revealed, oh cool, she was like some kind of space soldier from Mars. That's neat, I guess. If the sequel wants to keep her lost past relevant, it's gonna need to introduce some new element which actually does carry consequences for Alita's story. Okay, I really didn't want to talk about this, but since we're on the topic, what the hell is going on with Dua Lipa's Swan Song? Like, what is this? How did this happen? What is going on here? I'll tell you what happened here. What happened was Fox Studio got really nervous about this anime stuff, and they decided to throw a ridiculous marketing budget at the movie. They even gave it enough money to have a spot at the Super Bowl. But they realized they had even more money left over, so the marketing team was like, well, maybe we should do something else, something a little bit more special, like a promotional music video, let's say. Who should we get? Well, that depends, the marketing executives say, confused by the demographic that they should be appealing to. Is this an action movie, which would appeal to, like, older men, or is it a movie about girl power? Well, they, and no one else, decided that this must be a movie about young girl power, so they decided to make a music video directed at that. So they got Dua Lipa, and then this existed. Thanks. Alright, so get a load of this. A kaleidoscopic, rocket-fueled journey through time, space, mirror balls, roller discos, bucket hats, belting beats, throbbing bass lines, and an absolute slam dunk of the best times in the global club culture throughout the decades. Cool, Dua Lipa. Look, I'm gonna give these kids the benefit of the doubt and just assume that they went into this knowing it was dumb as hell and they just decided they'd have fun with it. And if that's what happened, you know, good for them. I'm glad they had a good time and they made a quick buck doing it, but Jesus. There's a special feature on the extended Lord of the Rings disc where Peter Jackson and his writers exhaustively break down every single creative deviation they made from Tolkien's trilogy and meticulously explain the thought process behind them. Say what you will about the movies respecting or representing the source material, but I've never heard a good counterargument against the reasoning presented there. And any gripes or misgivings that I had about these creative liberties were put to rest by this long, thoughtful presentation where the writers open the curtains a little and lay it all out. These people spent literally years poring over Tolkien's writings and scrutinizing the script and working tirelessly to do the best job they could. Creative liberties were taken, of course, but all the broad strokes were there. It's still Lord of the Rings. Sure, they never run into Tom Bombadil, the Shire never gets scoured, but so what? The ring is evil, Frodo brings it to Mordor, the nations of men rally together in a massive conflict that all culminates at the Black Gates. Sam is a beast, Sauron is defeated, Grey Ship's done. This might be different from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, but it is still Lord of the Rings. And with Alita, this alternate universe imitation of Alita does a pretty decent job of standing on its own as a single film, save for the sequel baiting. But where do you go from here? This looks like Alita, but they managed to change absolutely everything critical to the story. Her backstory, Zalem, Nova, and even the giant twist that drives the core of the story. Look, Disney owns Alita's movie rights now. Disney will never sell the rights back to the Japanese animation studio worthy of it. Disney will hold on to the rights until the stars themselves burn out. Therefore, a sequel is inevitable. And maybe, just maybe, Disney will be cool and give a lot of creative freedom to the director handling it. Heck, maybe Robert Rodriguez will return to direct. Maybe they'll even give it a great budget and plenty of creative room to play in. And who knows, if it's under the Fox umbrella, they might even allow an R rating in the future. All these things are technically possible, and maybe an absolutely amazing sequel can exist in the future. But I don't think it's very likely. And personally, I'm content with what we've got. I know I just spent 30 minutes nitpicking and criticizing, and sure, I could think of more stuff to poke at, but man, I can't be mad at this movie. For all my misgivings, it's just so much damn fun. It's got so much heart, grit, and personality. Sure, it's a little watered down compared to the zany, over-the-top manga, but it's got miles more charisma, style, brains, and heart than most movies I have ever seen. I was waiting for this movie for 15 years, and when it finally got off the ground and came out, I could not have been happier with the result. The film is a miracle, and I'm proud to say it's one of my favorites. Like Ito just wanted to keep Alita pure, maybe I'm the man-child who just wants to protect this imperfect miracle. Keep it unstained, its potential untapped for fear it might go wrong somehow. Maybe I'm the weak one who fears the future, unaware of Alita's strength to overcome the bloodthirsty fever dream of Hollywood politics. All I know is that if a sequel is going to happen, whether I like it or not, whether I'm ready or not, I hope my fears are proven wrong.